Good evening, and welcome to What's Your Story? As we look in history's rearview mirror, it is easy to forget that the United States spent 20 years in Vietnam. Billions of dollars were spent, and more than 50,000 Americans lost their lives. Like the Civil War, the Vietnam War tore the country apart. Many people are still angry and disillusioned. There are deep and inescapable psychological scars that still have not healed. My guest tonight was in Vietnam. He has agreed to share his story with us. Welcome to the show, Lieutenant Keeney.
Thank you, Jim.
I can't tell you what an honor it is to have you here and to have you come in and talk about a critical period in America's history that you were a central participant. If we don't say so, all of us here at Nutmeg Public Access TV bow in respect to you and salute you and honor you and thank you for your service.
Thank you.
All right. Would you please tell our audience a little bit about yourself? Like, where were you born?
Born in Hartford Hospital.
Okay.
So I'm local.
You're a local guy?
Sure.
Born right there? Mm-hmm. All right. And how many siblings do you have?
I have a sister who's 4 years younger, and I would have had a brother, Douglas. He died a few weeks after childbirth. Okay. So just a sister.
So you're the oldest?
I'm the oldest.
You're the oldest. You were the leader of the family.
Right.
I always ask my guests this because it gets them thinking. Where did you go to high school?
Well, I started off in a public high school in Summers, and at that time the school system wasn't as good as it is today. So for 3 years I was at Suffield Academy, a prep school,
okay,
to get into college, and I was a day student there.
Okay. What was the mascot of your school?
Tiger.
The Tiger.
Right.
You remember the Tigers?
Sure.
Did you play any sports while you were in school?
Swimming, soccer.
Okay. So you were a 6-footer, right? So
not quite 6 foot.
Okay, well,
yeah.
Basketball, no?
My son plays a good game of basketball. I'm not as good.
Okay,
yeah.
All right. What do you remember about your high school years?
I remembered them as being extremely helpful, almost more helpful than college, because there was a close ratio between teachers and students, and the teachers obviously taught the sports as well, or coaches in the sports. So that helped a lot. And I think I was more prepared for college than some would have been because of the close-knit community there.
Now, what was your cultural experience like where you grew up in high school? Did you have access to many different cultures, many different people, or?
Not a whole lot, no. Yeah. It was pretty straightforward, not really too diversified.
Not really too diversified?
No.
Did that hinder you as you grew, or did you come to realize, hey, gee, I missed this part, and now I'm glad I've been turned on to the many cultures around me?
I think what you just said, it was helpful to be exposed ultimately. I mean, certainly at Suffield Academy, we had people from Nigeria, all over the world, Venezuela, who were some of the better soccer players.
Okay.
So there I was exposed to a pretty good diversified group.
Pretty good group, yeah. All right, talk to me about high school days. Did you have a car or a hot rod?
I did. My very first car was a 55 Chevy convertible. It was a hot car.
A 55 Chevy convertible.
Right.
And were your happy days at that point? Those are happy days?
Those are very happy days.
Yeah.
Enjoyed them a lot.
Now talk to me about being a teenager with a 55 Chevy convertible. Hey, come on, you're on top of the world, aren't you?
Well, a convertible's a great car to have. Back in those days, I bought the car from Jimmy Belize. Belize Chevrolet was a big name back then. And $600.
$600.
$600 for a Chevy, and it was a great car. I had that for a lot of years.
Talk to
Wish
me.
I had it now.
Absolutely.
It's worth a lot of money now.
Absolutely. You're right, because I'm looking for guys to come and do the car show on here.
Sure.
But those things are very expensive. You're right.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to do is set the tone for the culture in which you grew up, which led directly to your decisions as an adult, which led you directly to Vietnam, which led you on this journey, which brings you here. So that's what I'm attempting to do, is give people a view of Norm, before he became Lieutenant Keeney in Vietnam. So now you got your Chevy, you're living a decent life. What was America like to you? Do you remember the strife of the 60s
Sure.
going on around you at that particular point? How did that impact you, or did it impact you at all?
Well, I was certainly concerned about it, and it wasn't that I was ready to take action so much at that point, but I wanted to get through the high school years into college and begin to make my statement, on a job and so forth. So I was anxious to move on, and my freshman year in college, of course, President Kennedy was assassinated.
November 22nd, 1963.
Exactly. So that was my freshman year in college. I was in the ROTC program.
Explain to people what ROTC is.
Reserve Officer Training Corps, which is basically you're in the service for 4 years to learn about your branch of the military. In my case, it was Army. And then you go to active duty for 2 years typically, and then 4 years reserve. So my freshman year, as I say, President Kennedy was assassinated, and I wasn't sure what was going to happen after that. I knew he was shot. We heard about that on walkie-talkie. We were out on maneuvers, actually, at school. And so we heard by walkie-talkie that he had been shot. We hadn't heard he had been killed until later. So at that point, my world changed a bit. I wasn't sure whether I was going to be able to finish college, what was going to happen. But I was determined at that point that I was, if I could, go through college, go directly into the service and try to do my part, because I felt we were growing up in the best country in the world. And I felt I certainly had an obligation to help that country along and do my part to share in that responsibility.
Now, the culture that you grew up in, right? What's your ethnic background, Lieutenant Keeney? What are you, Irish?
Irish, English, Scottish, basically those
and
three.
And your father, what was your father?
He was the same.
Okay, and your mom?
Same.
Okay.
Right.
So did you have like Irish food, English food? Not mutton, please, don't tell me. No offense to you mutton lovers out there.
So some people ask me now, what was a favorite dish? Well, if you've been to Ireland or you've been to England,
yes,
the cooking isn't as great, for instance, as perhaps Italy or France or some of those places.
Yeah.
But we had popovers, which is sort of an English dish.
All right.
And we had other kinds of things. My mom was a great cook, but it wasn't cuisine specific to England or Ireland, whatever. It was just good food.
Now, when you were in high school, did you still say the Lord's Prayer?
Sure.
Yeah. What do you think about that?
I think it should be said.
You think it should be said?
It should be optional to people, to kids, but it should be permitted.
Did you say the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag?
We did.
We did.
Yeah.
And what did you think of that?
I thought that's great. It kind of shares the message of this is a great country under God, and we should participate in continuing to have it be a great country.
Did you have, so your view is that America is a great place, and we have every obligation to help it along with all its sins and all its errors. It's the best place still to be. Is that fair to say?
I think that's a fair statement. I think sure we make mistakes. Other countries make mistakes.
Sure, yeah.
But by and large, we've been a big help to other countries around the world.
Yes, indeed.
We've made certainly mistakes, but we've tried to do our part, and I think some of the allies have tried to do their part in making the world a better place.
Now, when you found out on November 22nd, 1963, that President Kennedy had been killed, that rocked your world, if you will, because up to that point, everything was, if you will, hunky-dory. Things were fine,
Sure.
Sailing right along, got enough food, got a decent home, got a car, got clothes. I'm good, right?
Right.
And there's no segregation against me. I can go anywhere I want to go, buy what I want to buy. Okay. But then Dallas happened.
Sure.
And the view of the government from the American perspective in many different cultures. First of all, I can remember that day, and there was no sadness in my family like that day. It was like
terrible.
we lost a member of your own family.
Exactly. Yeah, it was tough. It was very tough to deal with, and I think for several days after that, everybody was just downtrodden
In
and
shock,
really
yeah.
in shock and sad.
That something as gruesome as that could happen right
In the
here
United States.
in the United States.
Right,
Yes.
exactly.
So, what was your view of the government on November 22nd, 1963, prior to your learning that President Kennedy had been? How did you view the government? Did you view it as a friend? Did you view it as the president was somebody special? That if the president said it, it was true? What was your world view of the government?
I think, like most of my fellow classmates, we were a little naive. We felt that, the government was giving us a straight story, that the president, I personally thought John F. Kennedy was a great president. I really, really, really liked him as a president. He was very charismatic. You saw his family. You learned a little bit about him and so forth, and I was totally shocked that could have happened, that anybody had that much animosity against him to do that.
Yeah, it changed America.
Changed America.
Took away a lot of our innocence that day.
It sure did.
It certainly did.
Yeah.
Yes. And President Kennedy's death, did that make you more determined to serve the nation?
Yes.
How
it
so?
did. Well, the thought was originally to get my degree, perhaps go on to grad school and so forth.
Yes.
I was determined after that happened to go directly into the service after I graduated from college and fulfill my obligation then.
Okay, all right.
So I upon my senior year, got that deferment canceled and went straight into the Army.
Let's talk about that. You say you had a deferment. And how did you get your deferment? And tell people who may not know what a deferment is.
Well, if you're an ROTC, you do have the option, at least you did at that point in time, to request a deferment to fulfill graduate school and get some help, some GI assistance on that. I don't know if that still exists or not, but I had the opportunity to do that. I chose not to opt for that.
Now, when you were 18, did your pop take you down to the office and register you? Did you still have to register back then?
We had to register. My story, if we go back a bit,
Yes.
my dad died when I was 6 years old.
Okay, all right.
He was a diabetic, and so he and my mom were married for 8 years, and then he had complications of diabetes and died as a result of that. So prior to my mom meeting him, she had been dating someone who went to Annapolis, was on the football team, and actually went to war, was assigned to Pearl Harbor on the battleship Arizona.
All right, okay.
She had dated him for 6 years and was looking forward to perhaps getting married at some point.
All right.
And that picture totally changed. He was killed. He was Connecticut's first casualty of World War II.
December 7th, 1941? Is that
Right.
when he died?
Right.
At Pearl Harbor?
At Pearl Harbor, the Japanese came in, attacked that battleship, and he was one of the first to die. And he was the first from Connecticut. The Wethersfield Historical Society has records of that. And the last to die was also from Connecticut on a different ship, the Indianapolis. And he and his fellow, people on the ship had brought the 2 bombs that were going to go to the Enola Gay to attack Japan.
August 6th and August 8th, 1945.
That's right.
Yes.
So he and his fellow shipmates had brought those 2 bombs over in top secret form to deliver, and then the ship was ready to go. There was some difficulty elsewhere that they were called to help out on. And so in the process of doing that, they were hit by a Japanese torpedo. All shipmates went down. They were actually eaten by sharks. They sent out an SOS, and nobody ever responded to that SOS because they felt it was a false message.
Yes, yes.
So Lieutenant Robert Allen Keeney was Ensign Robert Allen Keeney was the last from Connecticut to die. They were neighbors in Wethersfield. So the first and the last to die from Connecticut were roughly neighbors.
My goodness gracious.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
And then
Go on, please.
and
please.
then a couple of years later, my mother met my dad to be, and the war was still on. So their wedding was very low-key out of respect for those who were serving. And they had a great life together, but it was short-lived, only 8 years before he died. So that's kind of what led up to, that's my background in terms of someone who was close to my mom, who served, and someone who would have, except he was a diabetic and couldn't.
Lieutenant Keeney, you're wearing your uniform today.
It's a little tight. This is the uniform I wore at 23 years old.
Well, it's looking good.
I'm just back from vacation, so it's a little snug.
All right, let's talk about some of the decorations on your uniform.
Sure.
Let's let people know. What is this above your pocket? Yes, that. Right?
This?
Yes, that.
Those are jump wings, and I went through airborne school at Fort Benning.
Airborne Ranger?
Airborne Ranger.
All right.
Actually, not a Ranger, airborne.
Just airborne.
Not Ranger.
All right.
The one below that's a Bronze Star
Okay.
for action in Vietnam, and my unit did a particularly good job against hostile forces, so I got that. This is a Vietnam Service Medal for just being in country.
Okay.
Everyone who's in country gets that.
All right.
Connecticut, for those who serve in foreign wars, gives you that ribbon. And then this is just a Good Conduct Medal.
Yes, indeed.
Didn't
Yes.
get ostracized or jailed or anything while I was there.
No Article 16.
No Article 16.
There we
no,
go.
No.
There's a A on your sleeve there. What is that all about?
That, I think, again, this is 50 years ago. I
Yeah.
believe that is First Army.
Okay.
That was my last assignment. I was a little better than a year in Vietnam. This is the Vietnamese MACV advisory patch for that. But after serving a little over a year, I extended for an additional month or two.
Okay. Yeah.
And that meant I had less duty in the States before ultimately going on to my career. But I was assigned to headquarters unit in the 509th down at Fort Benning and served headquarters company as the company commander.
Yeah.
They had just failed a CMRI, which is Command Maintenance and Readiness Inspection.
Oh boy, is that from the Pentagon or is that?
That's, I believe it emanates from the Pentagon.
Okay, yeah.
So they had failed it. I came on board. The inspection team was to come back 90 days later, and we had to get everybody
Up to
ship-shape,
snuff,
which we did, and we passed it
Absolutely.
with flying colors after that. But I thought I was going to have easy duty after Vietnam, and that didn't come to pass. So.
Well, tell us a little bit about the degrees and things that you acquired through your education. What is your educational background, please?
I've got a BA in economics
And where did you get that from?
from St. Lawrence University.
From St. Lawrence? And where is that located?
Upper New York State, Canton, New York,
All right.
not far from the Seaway.
All right, okay.
So, and then following the Army, I was in an estate planning company at that time called Connecticut General. We helped business owners with their businesses, putting in pension plans, helping them with their objectives and so forth. So for that, I got my CLU designation, which is Chartered Life Underwriter, and also CHFC, which is Chartered Financial Consultant. And I did that for 46 years. And
Wow.
helped a lot of people with their families and was making their businesses more successful, so forth. That was a great career. I really enjoyed it.
Really loved it, did
Yeah.
you? Yes. When I spoke to you privately,
Mm-hmm.
you and I, Lieutenant Keeney, at our church,
Sure.
which, by the way, I will fully disclose that Lieutenant Keeney is my Christian brother. We attend the same church, Avon Congregational Church in Avon, Connecticut. And if you're looking for a house of worship, come and join us, right?
For sure.
Absolutely.
It's a great place.
Come on and join us. You've said that God played a direct role in your life from very early on. Where did you get your indoctrination? The word is meant kindly here, about God and what God could do and how God helped you. Where were you first exposed to that concept of God?
Well, really through my mother at a very early age. She was a Christian Scientist growing up,
Okay.
changed over to Congregational when she was married and so forth, and we went to a small Congregational church in Somersville, Connecticut.
Okay.
And it's interesting because not that I noted at that point in time, we had a lot of relatives in town a lot of people had my back. So even though my father was gone, I had an uncle who would take me to baseball games and
right, yes.
other cousins and so forth that were great. But as I got older, I found that in the eyes of people that I met, and in looking past it, to the past at other activities, I really found that God helped me. And there were a lot more than just coincidences. For instance, I met my wife-to-be in Northampton. I worked up in that area, had a house there. And her mom had the same birthday as my mother, which is a little unusual.
A month, day, and year, or just month and day?
Just month and day.
Month and day, okay.
Yeah, she was quite a bit younger than my mom.
Yeah, of course, that would work, yeah.
But so same birthday is interesting. And in the process of getting ready to figure out when our wedding day was going to be, we settled on a particular date, May 6th.
All right.
And of course, my dad had been dead for many, many, many years. I hardly knew what their anniversary was.
Yes.
I really didn't.
Yes, yes.
That happened to be my mom and dad's anniversary date. And she didn't push us to try to pick that date or anything. She left that to us. But that was the date that we came up with that worked the best for both families and so forth. Following the service, when I went into my career, I was in a class at Connecticut General with 8 other guys. And at that time, and I was just a young fellow out of the Army, 24, and hadn't had any sales background.
Yes.
But our class broke all sales records for Connecticut General nationwide for a new starting class. And the only reason that I was part of that was because I had some great individuals with me that helped a lot. So I certainly wasn't on the top of that class, but because of that class, I learned a lot, and it really helped ultimately my career and doing a lot of things. And I found a lot of times the people that I associated with were, from my standpoint, certainly better than I was and really helped in my journey. So I attribute that to God, to His looking out for me.
Lieutenant Keeney, how would you describe your idea of being a white male in American society versus being, say, Mexican or African American? You've heard the phrase white privilege?
Sure.
Were you cognizant of that for you as you grew up? Was that a reality for you? Is it not real? Did you see its impact on others around you? How did that ever come into your view, your field of thinking?
Well, I consider myself very, very fortunate. I grew up in a family with a lot of relatives around, in a loving community, not very diversified. So I found out about, obviously race relations and other kinds of things through TV more than anything else. So
television was your medium?
Television was my medium.
So it shaped your view.
And then I learned as an adult that Martin Luther King Jr. had come up and spent some time in Simsbury, working at the tobacco fields there and going to restaurants and so forth. And he thoroughly enjoyed being up here as opposed to being down in the Deep South.
Yes.
And part of his speech, the I Have a Dream speech, was germinated when he was up in the Simsbury area and enjoying some of the fruits of being up north versus down south. So I learned about some of that at a much later time in my life.
Where were you on April 4th, 1968, when Dr. King was assassinated?
Let's see, 1968. I was just prior to going into the service.
Do you remember the feeling in the country?
Oh, it's terrible.
How did it impact you personally?
Yeah.
Tell us about how that impacted you, his death, his assassination. Were you scared for the race relations, the nation? Did you not know it was going to happen? Or
I didn't know it was going to happen. No, it was the same with Kennedy. I had no idea that was going to happen. I knew about the fire hoses being trained on people and some of the bad things that were happening down south. one of the Beatles songs, Blackbird,
Yes,
is
yeah.
directly about
Yes, yeah.
an allegory about
Yeah.
the situation with the civil rights and so forth in America, and he was concerned about it. And
Sure.
I think a lot of us were concerned about it.
Good.
Yeah.
All right. Lieutenant Keeney, we've just finished part one. We've just finished part one with Lieutenant Keeney. He's going to join us for a second part of this interview on his experiences in Vietnam. I need to say once again, we need to thank Lieutenant Keeney for all of his service and all of you who served in Vietnam and came home. Stay tuned for part two of this interview with Lieutenant Norm Keeney. My guest, Norm Keeney. Everybody has a story. What's yours? Thank you for tuning in. Until next time, good night.